Family and friends, what a privilege to gather together and to have you all come together. We're just a few minutes late at the moment because I've just discovered people here that I had no idea they were going to be here from South Australia, for starters, and then the Oliver family. Sorry, I had to think that she was what was a married surname. Then the Oliver family, last I heard of most of them, are travelling the world somewhere, but they're here. It's wonderful to welcome them. And to all of you who are here from whatever branch of their family, I'm delighted that we've been able to stitch our family together a little bit and together strengthen each other as we value our heritage, because we have a remarkable heritage. I want to welcome some of the dignitaries, but I'll introduce them a little later, and some of the people who will play a part in this commemoration and dedication, including some quite gifted people who are contributing in small ways today. For those of you who've been representing your family branches and doing family history and genealogy, many of you sharing a lot of that with me, I want to acknowledge you. It's not all my work. I am fairly enthusiastic, but that doesn't mean I do all the work. And I want to acknowledge many of you who've contributed in various ways. And even this weekend, I keep getting, as I just did then, another piece of paper stuffed in my pocket to update Family Tree. There are many things we could say, but I want to simply welcome you and say to you that we're in this ceremony, we're acknowledging 14 people in particular. The very beginning of my research on the day after, I asked that question that some of you have heard when I asked the other Ian Stehbens and his brother John Stehbens, John, do you know how we're related? And he said, wouldn't have a clue. And so that next morning, it was school holidays or something, and I was in Brisbane free. I went straight to the archives, and within about half an hour, I discovered the two great-grandfathers that we knew we had there side by side in the records, with a slightly different spelling of Stehbens, I must admit, and but I was ready for that. But remarkably, there were 11 others with them. And nothing in my family history, story and background did I have any preparation for that. I had no idea that family came to Australia. I've learnt from some of you that you knew one of them had, you know, that your double great-grandmother or your great-grandmother had been here, but finding them was exciting. I started with the Stehbens surname to see how many of them I could stitch together, and then after that, that took you into all the other surnames, of course, but then I had to go back and start with the girls and start working on the girls, and thought, how on earth will I find where they went to, and with what spelling will we find? The other part of the story is that researching their burials and their end of life on mortal earth was also rather interesting, and I want to say to you that at the moment I've identified 143 descendants of that family buried in their cemeteries here in Bundaberg. When I told my wife I'd discovered 143 of them, she said, I think you better talk to the authorities and get naming rights. So welcome to Stehbens Cemetery. As it's exploded and the family has developed, those of us working on this now, Klaus Johann, who was the second boy in the family, the eldest son of Wilhelmina, of Minna or Anna, as different names she went by, of course she was christened Anna Wilhelmina, and her husband called her Minna, and the granddaughter was called Minnie as a result, and so it went on. That when we go to the eldest son, Jacob, he was an outstanding horseman and recognised for such, and he became the tailor. That's the guy who looks after all the horses in a droving team, because each drover going long distances has about 6 horses, and all the drovers' horses have to bring up the tail, and the tailor's the man who is expert at dealing with horses. We didn't know how the South Australian branch got to South Australia for a long, long time. But eventually, through the Chapman family at Boppel, I discovered that Tom Chapman was this drover, and because his mother had delivered the Stehbens children out there on T-Bar Station. And so I got into them and discovered that Tom was a drover and found out all about his droving. And in there is where Jacob and the family, his wife is cook in the team and he is the tailor. They bring up the rear of the droving team, took their cattle to the Salisbury market from Maryborough to Salisbury market in Adelaide. What a long drove down the Darling and so on. But they did that, and that family dispersed there, and they're all over the Melbourne and South Australian areas, but some of them are now living in Kalula Cove down by Tincan Bay or somewhere. No, that's the other part of the South Australian clan, sorry. And John Klaus Johann came here as the first selector, and for Bundaberg historians, they realised that the Danish and German-speaking Danes, which are significant populations in Bundaberg, are rather underrepresented in the heritage. And we're partly to blame for that because we didn't know that they were the first of that population to come here. And we didn't realise that they were here right at the beginning. And they were the people who discovered your water table under here. They put down their 50-foot well, went through 5 metres of sandstone into the aquifer that's underneath that and in that, to supply Bundaberg with its irrigation and its water supply today. But that's the work of these ancestors. Detlef, the father, who was the brickmaker and bricklayer, and his son Klaus Johann, who was clearly the leader of initiative in the family, and his younger brothers and so on, and his sisters and their partners. They're all part of that community because they weren't going to get involved in sugar because they'd experienced the disasters of sugar experiments in Maryborough. So it opened up a whole future, and he alone has over 2,500 descendants, about half of them in the Bundaberg region. That's a lot of descendants, and when we multiply it all out, you represent them. As we go down quickly down through the family from him, his sister Kate. Unfortunately, she and her female descendants, many of them have thyroid problems, many of them have scars, and when I'm talking to them, they automatically put their hand up here. But through those journey of generation of Kate, who married into Andreas Andresen, a guy who came from Schleswig a year after the Stehbenses. They were married, and Andreas went off to the goldfield with John and Detlef and the others, and Willem, and then when the floods washed them out, they came back, and their move was to come and get land as it opened up, the possibilities opened up for them right at the end of 1870 into 1871. Minna dying in Maryborough in 1870, and their daughter Maria dying there as a result of the rush and all the dysentery that the miners camped everywhere. There were no facilities, nothing, as thousands of people came through Maryborough over into Tanana and polluted the place. And instead of the place smelling like animal manure, it now smelt like human manure and urine everywhere. It was a terrible place to live. So no wonder Bundaberg thinks it's better than Maryborough. So Maria died, and Detlef went into the cemetery when his wife died and built a 5-course layer of bricks, 5 courses across the head of 2 graves. He was the bricklayer. He was involved in building the Maryborough Post Office as a labourer and bricklayer. He was involved in the Central Sugar Mill and building the stack there. He went to Gympie, and together they learnt to shaft and shore and winch and get empty and create what the possibility of shafts. But up here they became not gold they were looking for, but water, and that opened it up for Maryborough, for Bundaberg, I should say. Well, Kate died, and with her husband they were out near what was called 30-mile timber stage, 30 miles from the North Bundaberg station out along the line, a few k west of Gingin, just before Tyrone, and she's buried in a cane paddock with no marker, but right beside somebody else's grave that has a marker on it right there, and they know there's 2 graves. But I don't know which side Kate was buried, one or the other. But you can go and find that grave beside Mr. Kelpin out there at Tyrone. Kate and her family, some of them went north because of some interesting, sad behaviours of other people, but they moved to the North Queensland, and many of them are in Babinda, some of them are here, and remained in the Gingin area, etc. And their stories are a fascinating story as they spread across Queensland. So we then get down underneath that family to the Listers, because to the Elverys, because Willem was a twin. His son, a twin brother, died just after birth, but he was 12 years old when we came out here, and he's important that I recognise him today and introduce you to him, and because some of what he was and some of his gifts have flowed right through the family, and we'll celebrate that at this occasion. From Willem we go to Carolyn, and she married John Lister, and they were the people, his step-parents' father, or whatever he was, his stepfather's uncle or father, anyway, something in the family, owned the whole of Branyan at one stage, and but the Listers, he became a builder, and he married Kate Stehbens, and they took up land on Elverys Road, where Elverys later lived, and which became the reason Elverys Road is now named. But that was across the road from his brother Willem. So Listers and the Stehbens boys, and young David, who was the youngest of their family, he was there as like a twin, but 10 years younger than his older brother Willem, and he was never parted. And wherever Willem went, Detlef, a young Klaus Detlef as he was called, known as David, his family are Stehbens, S-T-E-V-E-N-S today, and we're delighted that they're represented here this morning as well. And then his 5-year-old sister, when they came, was Emma, the youngest girl in the family. Detlef I mentioned because of his relationship with Willem, but we've had the Strand clan here over the weekend, and we've heard some beautiful stories from Sherilyn this morning, and the story of some heroism in the First World War from Janet yesterday afternoon. So that's something of the family, but there's we will be honouring also Anna Wilhelmina, because, as I mentioned, Detlef memorialised her and his daughter Maria, but after a while that cemetery was closed as Maryborough realised it made itself a putrid place and they didn't want to pollute anything, so they shut down their cemetery, and about 50 years later it was all removed and it's now Rose Garden. But the surveyor plotted some of the things that were left behind, and you can now, therefore, if you're clever to follow the surveying plot, locate those two graves where they were in Maryborough. But as they were obliterated and they were memorialised, we're honouring them today. So Anna Wilhelmina and her husband Detlef and all their family, plus one, a grandchild, because in this site, on this cemetery, all we had was a patch of grass, and when I investigated it, this is where Detlef was buried, never got round to being memorialised by anybody. His son Klaus Johann and his wife Ottilie are in that one there, repainted white one just behind you there, between us and the orange car. That little boy, that boy that was buried here, the grandson, was killed when the boiler at the Bonner sugar mill out here exploded one morning because of carelessness, where hessian or rope had got into the mill pond and been sucked up by the pumps into the gauges on the boiler, giving a false reading, and when water was put into the boiler, which would not have happened had the gauges been right, it exploded and 3 men were killed and 3 others were injured and badly scalded and survived for some time. So these two, grandson and granddad, were buried here, but they represent the whole of the family, and welcome to this special time together. I want to now produce a tribute for you to both Detlef and Anna Wilhelmina, whose maiden surname was Gruber, the same as the surname as Franz Gruber, who wrote Silent Night music. We'll come to that a little later. Let me get my clips on this and my glasses. Detlef was a man we never knew, and the memory of him had not been passed down, except that there was a bare patch of lawn right here until now. And kept in an old suitcase on a top shelf in an old farm shed, there was a photo. A milkmaid on Theodore Stehbens's farm, remembered that a photo had hung in the farmhouse, a portrait of a husband and wife, and that it was said to be the photo of Theodore Stehbens' grandparents, Detlef and Anna Wilhelmina. How could that be? After all, Anna Wilhelmina had died in 1870, and the family certainly didn't have any camera that early. And photography had only become a commercial art in the 1860s and was used to record the American Civil War. So, with those kind of questions in my mind, being they convinced that this is who they were, I hastened to the Grey Cliff property in central Queensland to examine the photo, thinking surely it has to be a generation later. And when the suitcase was opened, there were two reactions in me. No, it's not the next generation. It's not Jacob. It's not Klaus Johann. It's not Willem. It's not David. Yes, it is our ancestor, and we don't need DNA to prove it, for I was looking at an image of myself. How wonderful. Then, when I returned to the Lockyer Valley, where I was working and living at the time, I visited a family of German ancestry. I think it was the Litzos. And there on their wall was a very similar photo. And they knew that it had come from the 1860s and was taken in Hamburg before the family migrated, because there were guys with flashy new cameras trying to make a living, and people migrating should have had their images recorded. And then it all clicked, and its origin has been proven subsequently in many other ways since. Now, today, we can know Detlef and Anna Wilhelmina Stehbens. Detlef was born in 1814, one of 11 children, of which only 4 lived to adulthood, Detlef being the youngest of those 4. He was born in a large Danish farmstead, thatch roof. The thatch is still there today, falling in because they can't redevelop it because of town planning regulations, housing animals with hay storage above and a residence at one end. His father, Franz Stehbens, had migrated from feudalism in Mecklenburg to Holstein, the southern part of the Danish kingdom, and settled in a farming district as an permanent employee of Klaus Rolfs. Franz was variously described as a servant, a small landowner, and an artisan, and as he was permanently resident of the farm, it implies he was adept at different tasks, leatherwork apparently being one of those of vital importance, for example. His eldest brother became what we would call an agronomist today and lived in the district's Gartenhaus. He had served in the Danish army for required military service, and once retired, then widowed, he migrated together with his married younger son to Iowa to join his older son, who'd migrated to the US 13 years earlier and sponsored him. The family became prosperous American farmers in Iowa. Detlef's other brother was Franz Jr., and he became the town's principal shoemaker, leatherworker, cobbler, saddler, whatever you want to call him. He was also the organist in St. Nikolai Church, not any organ, but a grand pipe organ donated by the King of Denmark in 1593. His role extended to being director of music, bandmaster as well in the town of Verden, and because of this role, his standing in the community, he never migrated, though his grandchildren did, and they went to America, taking their musical genes with them and their craftsmanship as well. Detlef, being the youngest son, was destined to be a labourer. He married at 21, and then at 23 he served in the Danish army as required, meaning he's obviously bilingual. After discharge, he was a day labourer, but soon the records show that he was brickmaking and bricklaying. In those early years, he and his wife Katerina rented residences in the village on a farm. Then, after only 5 years of marriage, his wife died, leaving him with 2 infant boys, Jacob and Detlef. Almost 2 years later, in 1843, he chose to marry Anna Wilhelmina Gruber. But when they approached the pastor, they were told they were too poor to be married, for they could have children that the community would have to support. It was law. In the words of the 20th century pastor who was translating the record for me as we sat together in his office, he scratched his head and said, "But how works such a stupid law?" Let me quote the record of the birth of their fifth child, Vibka Katharina, who became the one who married Andreas Andriessen. According to the official announcement of the midwife Antje Schroeder of Verden, Anna Gruber, on the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, when everyone in Germany sings Silent Night, in 1849 she gave birth in the house of the widow Mestorp at Butler Dyke to an illegitimate daughter, her fifth illegitimate child. The father of this child is revealed as the widower Detlef Stehbens from Noorderverden. The couple have covenanted to marry and already have lived together for 8 years. The Poor Statute prohibits the conjugal connection of these two people. Baptismal Register, Werden, 24th of the 12th, 1849. One thing is clear. Detlef and Anna had committed to being faithful, promising each other that one day when they were secure financially, they would marry. The memory of this injustice remained with Detlef not only to the day they married, which they did in 1855, mind you, but to the day his wife Anna Wilhelmina died. More on that later. As a youngest son, he inherited no land, no trade, nor in the society of the time. He was at best a labourer, hired a day at a time as needed by some farmer. When the fields were dormant, the brick pit and the bricklaying became the work of the labourers in the bleak winters. Other than his family and friendships, the joy in Detlef's life was music. Sundays were special, for that was when he could sit and listen to the wonderful pipe organ played by his brother Franz. Social events were special too, for that is when he could play the violin for dances, celebrations, accompanying singers, and playing in his brother's ensembles. When he was 41 and Anna Wilhelmina was 34, they were given permission to marry. By then they had 8 children together. As a poor man, life was difficult, interspersed with grief, but anchored in faith, family and music. 1864 was a year of upheaval. To quote Detlef's daughter-in-law, Joanna, that was when, quote, the Prussians marched in through our village with their pointy helmets, and they took our land. They weren't German, she said. Nein, the Germans, they marched in and took our land. As I mimic her grandson. The allegiance of most Holsteiners at the time was to the King of Denmark, but when the Prussian army was able to march 150 kilometres into Denmark and defeat the Danish army at Dieber, or Diebel it looks in written English, at Dieber, the other powers of the time ratified 40% of Denmark being lost to Prussia, and Holstein was disrupted. There was no public service anymore, no trade, no postal services, economy nosedived. It took 3 years before Prussia was even begin to establish a public service in the occupied territories. They didn't expect that victory. The response of pastors and local leaders was to encourage the poor to migrate to America if they had sponsors there, which Joachim, Detlef's brother, did. A German in Brisbane, Johann Huesler, saw an opportunity for the Queensland government to encourage a migration scheme. Within a year, the scheme began to operate. Dieseldorf, a migration agency in Hamburg, together with a major shipping company, Godfrey and Son, promoted and effected the scheme whereby immigrants could be shipped at minimal cost, and the Queensland government provided land orders to the shipping company in return. The new colony of Queensland was desperate both for settlers and labour. And Detlef's widowed brother, Joachim, who had a son in America, was sponsored. He migrated to Iowa simultaneously. Detlef and Anna, together with 8 children, a daughter-in-law and 2 grandchildren, migrated on the Sophie to Brisbane. But to everyone's surprise, the government directed it instead to Brisbane to Hervey Bay, where it was met by another vessel and the passengers transferred into Maryborough. They had a good voyage, if you regard having 180 people in cargo space between decks in a vessel as good. Had an excellent doctor, a very competent captain, and a reasonable voyage, except for quite a rough passage across the Great Australian Bight. But then the becalming in Bass Strait for 8 days was more than compensation. One oral memory remains of that part of the voyage. On the first night in that Mill Pond calm, it was the 7th of August 1865, there was a full moon, and all the passengers were on deck, beheld their arrival in Australian waters with awe. They'd seen the Otway Lighthouse. And Detlef played Silent Night on his violin, or Stille Nacht, as his wife sang a duet with her 12-year-old son, Willem, a pure voice accompanied by his soprano mother. Anna had a soprano voice, and Willem was most tuneful. This moment was never forgotten by Willem, for he shared it with his wife, who shared it with her grandchildren, one of which shared it with me. Their faith raised their voices in thanksgiving of their arrival safely in Australia. But it was a very significant Christmas carol, especially for Anna Wilhelmina Gruber. Composed by Franz Gruber, around the time of Anna Wilhelmina's birth, it became perhaps the best known and loved Christmas hymn in Holstein by the middle of the 19th century. It was always sung on Christmas Eve, and Anna Wilhelmina and Detlef had welcomed their first daughter, Katharina, or Wiebke Katharina, who became Kate, on Christmas Eve, 1849, that night, as it was being sung in the church. And so it was deeply significant to Anna Wilhelmina. But why on this night in August in Bass Strait did she sing her favourite Christmas carol? In English it's Silent Night, but in German it's Stille Nacht. Stille means something deeper even than silence. And Bass Strait was an utterly still and silent place. The storms were behind them. They'd seen the Cape Otway Lighthouse. They knew they'd arrived, and their joy and their Christian faith welled into song, never to be forgotten. This vessel, Sophie, had 25,000 red bricks as ballast from Hamburg. And once the immigrants were offloaded in Harvey Bay and landed in Maryborough, another vessel transferred the bricks to Maryborough. Two developments in Maryborough are about to begin: the construction of the Maryborough Post Office and the commencement of the development of a sugar plantation on Tanana Creek. Detlef, being a man of initiative, he found immediate employment in the construction of the post office as a labourer, first unloading 25,000 bricks onto the wharf and then as a bricklayer. Two of these, his offspring, Klaus Johann and Katharina, or Kate, who was then only 15, were handpicked to labour at the proposed sugar plantation. His father this amazing inlaid parquetry and so on, making beautiful cases and things, and he became Hiram Phillips' main coffin maker in Toowoomba later on. But he made this beautiful coffin for Anna, and after her funeral, Detlef returned to the cemetery and constructed this low head wall of bricks, making both her grave and that of her daughter Maria, right beside her, memorialised. Presumably, he affixed the names to the head wall. It was 2.4 metres long and 5 courses high, for the Archaeological Survey has recorded the head wall prior to the redevelopment of the cemetery on Kent Street. Now the cemetery is Elizabeth Park Rose Gardens, with tropical sunset roses growing where Anna and Maria's graves once were. The memorial created by Detlef was obliterated. Today we're making amends, and there is a memorial to Anna Wilhelmina and Detlef, which is to be revealed and dedicated. Detlef called her affectionately Minna. There were 4 aspects of Detlef's circumstance that are worth noting at this point. 1, their whole Queensland family were together when Anna Wilhelmina died. 2, looking forward kept him going. After 5 years in the colony, they were about to turn the corner into a new future. It would mean his being able to see that his sons would own their own land. For Minna's sake, he would commit himself to enabling them to fulfil that vision, a vision that was rooted in the quiet assurance God had promised him when they made that decision they would migrate. I will bless you, said God to them, and I will give you land, and there will be many descendants. Anna Wilhelmina understood his spirituality, and she too treasured this certain hope. The third point is that Detlef used his own heart and hands to build a simple memorial to Anna Wilhelmina at her gravesite. He built a low head wall of 5 courses of brick across the head of the graves of both him and their daughter Maria, each brick made with his own hands. Fourth point was that Minna's death certificate reveals something very, very significant about Detlef. When Detlef took Anna Wilhelmina to be his wife all those years ago, he promised he would marry her one day. That stupid statute, that diminishing of the poor, that demeaning of their love for one another had created an indelible wound in Detlef's psyche. How could he forgive the church? How could he forget what the Verdener community did to some of their own? How could he dignify his wife? How could he remove the stain that derived from their being quizzed by each midwife about their conception of their first 8 children? Each quiz, each report by the midwife to the pastor had devalued their commitment, their faithfulness, and Anna Wilhelmina's self-esteem. Detlef's long-held anger was let go through the dignity and grace shown by Anna Wilhelmina in her dying. With the help of somebody who could help him write in English, he provided the details required to register a death. He assertively wrote that Wilhelmina was married to him in her 24th year, thus defining their marriage as valid from the beginning. His declaration infers that their marriage had commenced in 1844, before the conception and birth of their first son, Klaus Johann. The marriage certificate that was required to be with them and to allow them to migrate was now irrelevant, invalid and unjust. If it wasn't washed away in the 1870 flood, as happened for many people, surely he threw it in the fire. In Minna's death, he had been liberated from private shame, and he had intentionally legitimised his children and his wife. Detlef chose to buy a boat, and aged 56 he could now return to crabbing and fishing, something he'd done as a poor man in Holstein, and the Merry River alive with crabs and fish. But there was a bigger dream, the possibility of owning their land. They could afford it now. They could obtain tools and transport equipment. So in 1870 a surveyor went to the Burnett, surveyed a new town called Bundaberg, then the nearby agricultural land opened to closer settlement, and the Detlef Stehbens group of men went north to select their first land. Detlef, 57, Klaus Johann, 26, Andreas Andresen, 31, and Willem, 17, were at least 4 of them who came. They knew from their flood experience to avoid floodable land. They agreed of land at the heart of today's Kepnock. It was Klaus Johann's turn to lead into the future. They knew from the plantation experience what kind of land and forest they were looking for. They returned to Maryborough, registered their selection, and then back to the Burnett to begin their ownership of land, to farm in, quote, an eternal summer, and to have no one as your master. And they knew they needed water, so Detlef selected another block a kilometre to the north, another excellent block for agriculture, with a toe slope down to permanent water in the swamp. However, the surveyor made some rearrangements, and progressively it was shifted to the east, and he ended up with a small piece of agricultural land, a good piece of swamp, and a lot of basalt rocks that was useless. So Detlef applied for a refund, which he received, and but there was still the need for water. The answer was a well on Klaus Johann's selection, called Forest View, for there was nothing else to be seen. A deep well, they had experience on the goldfield of digging a shaft and winching out the spoil, and the experienced bricklayer knew it would need to be lined. Down they went, excavating to 16 metres to discover the perfect quality water of the Elliott Aquifer. And Detlef committed to making the bricks and laying them to line the well. His years of hard work were not done yet, and he didn't do it once. In 1873, when Willem selected his first land, Detlef and family ensured that a 15-metre deep well was dug on his land, and again a 14-metre deep well was created on Willem's second selection on the Goodwood Road. Detlef did retire, and with his boat he was crabbing and fishing again near the mouth of the Clan River. At age 78, his family thought he was 80. His relative longevity resulted in prostate cancer, and he died at the home of his daughter Carolyn Lister in Hunter Street. He was buried here, but he's not here, for he and Anna Wilhelmina live on in their many descendants, over 5,500 of which 143 are buried in the Bundaberg cemeteries. A primitive Methodist minister, Reverend Matthew Foggan, conducted his funeral. He was Detlef's kind of man, a very practical man, an enthusiastic preacher and singer, and one who challenged those who exploited others, as he'd done on the Gympie Goldfield. As usual for this little pastor, he preached a strong sermon, confident of the resurrection and certain that hope is stronger than all our history. Detlef's name in Low German, would you believe, actually means heritage of his people. May this memorial that we will dedicate today be a contribution to sustaining the heritage of his people and the heritage of Bundaberg, and may all of you be inspired to treasure your heritage, adding to your remembered history, and may your life experience enable you to dream of a desired future where all are valued and love is evident in our families, communities and nations. I honour Detlef and Minna. I'm going to invite Anne Ballantyne to come forward, and together we will reveal something that lies under this. Please, Anne. Yeah, just turn that way. And this way. And this way. We'll come back to you.
Are you going to walk her around?
The violin was made in 1860. The family migrated in 1865. This violin was made in Prague, in the Prussian lands, and it's Detlef's violin. And it's been passed down progressively through the family. Not only did he play Silent Night on it in Bass Strait, but he entertained all the way out on the boat, because if you could entertain, somebody had to keep the boredom at bay. And his wife was a top soprano singer, and we know that from the inheritance of some of their daughters. One who was of the equivalent of Joan Hammond and sang with her, and in performance and musicals for Williamson's in Sydney often. And they both had remarkably similar voices. But this violin is something of a treasure, a heritage, and Anne is currently the custodian of it, a direct descendant of Willem. thank you, Anne, for being the custodian of this, and thank your husband Warren for seeing the possibilities of that and having it restored and framed. And I just hope you all realise that there's a lot of treasure of heritage in our family. This being one item that will indicate that. We'll lay it down. We need to put that back, this here, underneath it, just to, that's it. That'll do. Yeah. And need to cover it so it doesn't cook the violin in the sun. Yeah, we'll wrap it over it if we can, somehow. I'll get down there. That'll do. Thank you. One of Bundaberg's promising violinists, excellent performer, is Amy Collier. She doesn't belong to our family immediately, but she certainly works closely with one of our musical members of the family, and Elaine Stehbens. And so, Amy, would you come and commemorate this and recognise these musical people that were buried here, that we're memorialising today, by playing Polish dance and then Stille Nacht. Thank you. Would you welcome Amy Collier? You may have heard the sense of Masurka in there as well, but thank you. Thank you indeed, Amy. We appreciate the spirituality that's in that. Our Christian faith has expressed the faith of this family, and also the competency and musicianship that we're celebrating as well. Thank you for being part of that, and thank you, Elaine, and your partner for making all this possible. So thank you indeed. The grandchild of Detlef and Minna that's buried here is John Frank Jules, and Margaret Stehbens is preparing to present a soliloquy as that she's written called My Boy, John Jules. Thank you, Margaret. In this to you.
I am Emma. I'm not here. I'm over there with Fred. His grave is my dad's, and also that of my boy, John Frank Jules. Let me tell you something about him, and also something of myself. I was born in Schleswig-Holstein in 1860, the second youngest child of my mum and dad, Wilhelmina and Detlef Stehben, and I was born in the village poorhouse. It was decided to emigrate, and we arrived in Maryborough in August 1865. New country, new smells, new food, and it was warm. After 3 months at sea, it took us a little time to regain our land legs. My mum died when I was 10, my first real experience of grief. I was very, very sad, but my sisters and sisters-in-law made sure that I was looked after. School? Well, I was enrolled for a time, but it wasn't for me. Most of the kids in my class were a lot younger than me and made fun of me because I'd never been to school before. I didn't stay there long and mustn't have learnt a lot because when I was married I couldn't sign my own name. I just made an X. When I was about 12, we moved to Bundaberg, where my dad and brothers took up selections. They all worked hard, very, very hard. A couple of years later, my life changed when I met Jean-Jules, a French baker who lived in North Bundaberg. French, dark-haired, handsome, ooh la la. He seemed to find me attractive too. He talked to Dad, who agreed that we could marry when I turned 16. So we did. Soon after that, we moved to Mount Perry, where there was mine work for Jean. And I was pregnant. Our little baby, Jean-François Jules, was born in August 1877. I didn't have any family with me, but there was a doctor. Of course, this baby was beautiful, with that dark hair and long dark eyelashes. We loved him so much. The Mount Perry mine was short-lived and closed near the end of that year. What would we do now? We decided to go to Maryborough, which I knew. So we moved with little John Frank. However, there was no work. Knowing my dad used to go crabbing in the river, we talked it over and Jean decided to hire a boat. So he set off. He didn't come home that day, or the next, or the next. I was beside myself with anxiety for myself and little John Frank, who by this time was trying to sit up. I was desperate. There was nothing I could do. I checked with Mr. Gordon, from whom he'd hired the boat. He had neither seen nor heard about his boat since hiring it to Jean. After a week came the horrendous news that a boat had been found downstream with a body on board. It was Jean, although they wouldn't let me see him. He was buried in the Maryborough cemetery. What were little John Frank and I to do? He'd grow up with no memory of his father. More pressing was the question of where we were going to live and how we could buy food and other essentials. Most of my family had moved to Bundaberg. What could we do? Some heard of our plight and gave out of their own meagre resources. And over the next few months, I became aware of Fred Strand. He seemed to take an interest in us and our predicament. 8 months after Jean died, Fred and I were married. I was just so grateful to him for providing for us and taking on another man's child. He loved little John Frank. We decided to move back to Bundaberg, and our first baby together was born at John and Ottilie's farm. Little did we know that he was the first of 13 babies that Fred and I would have together. Our stay in Bundaberg was short-lived, as Fred needed to move to more remote areas to sink wells and to other rural work. Warra, Dalby, Surat, Burke, St George, Appledree Creek, Mitchell. It was a hard life. We lived under canvas. Food was scarce, mainly whatever Fred could trap or hunt. We were always out of town, almost impossible to buy any food. Meat, damper and billy tea was the standard fare. Not ideal for a pregnant or breastfeeding mother. I blame that for the babies we lost. Of our 13 children, 6 died at birth or soon after. Unimaginable grief. How could I possibly look forward to a new baby when it would likely die? One of my worst experiences was giving birth to Minnie under the sulky at Appletree Creek. Poverty, isolation, loneliness, lack of privacy. I couldn't help the tears. Of course, John Frank was with us too, a big brother. About the time Minnie was born, he left to find a job. We were so pleased that he eventually found work at the Bonner sugar mill. Of course, he started in the yard, learning what hard work was, although we already knew from Fred about hard work. After some years, he moved to the room where he and others had the responsibility of ensuring the gauges were full of water so that steam could be safely produced. And over time, he became the senior fireman there. He didn't have a ticket, but everybody knew that he knew his job. Until that fateful September day. All was working in their room. The gauges showed a constant level of water. Unbeknown to John, a piece of frayed rope was in the mill pond and was sucked up into the gauge, jamming it. No one knew anything was amiss until it was too late. The boiler exploded and the 3 men in the room had unsurvivable burns. Before he died, John Frank said it was not his fault, as he'd checked the gauges and they showed water level as normal. When I heard the news, I was heartbroken. My firstborn, my husband's son, one who reminded me so much of his father, was dead. The boiler exploded and the 3 men in the room had unsurvivable burns. Before he died, John Frank said it was not his fault, as he'd checked the gauges and they showed water level as normal. When I heard the news, I was heartbroken. My firstborn, my husband's son, one who reminded me so much of his father, was dead. Could I bear any more grief? Obviously yes, because later my soldier son died too. After John died, the company gave back to us his fob watch, which he always wore. They gave it back to me, and I gave it to Fred, and therefore for the next 19 years while Fred was alive, he wore John Jules's fob watch. We couldn't bury John Frank with his dad, who was in Maryborough, so we put him here with his grandfather, Detlef, who loved him. get it off.
We're coming to the point now where we want to unveil the memorial. I just asked Bonnie if you don't mind for a moment. John, if you can take the violin back to a safe place for a moment, please. I'm going to invite representatives of each of the branch of the family, and forgive me, I'm not trying to create any jealousies or anything, but I have invited particular members representing each of the branches of the family to play a part in this unveiling process. And there are good reasons why I've chosen the people concerned, but can I just check whether the Lesters are present? Is Rob Lester and Trish present? Okay. Is there anybody else present from the Lister family clan? I don't think so. Okay. Let me now begin with each of the representatives. The first one that represents the South Australian branch, as I call it, in other words, Jacob's branch, is a beautiful 17-year-old young woman with the golden hair and a top academic at her school who wants to do neuroscience at university next year. Her name is Jessica, and Jessica was heartbroken when I invited her and she found she couldn't come. But she wrote this to us that you might hear what she wants to say. Good morning, everyone, especially all those cousins, aunts and uncles I haven't had the opportunity to meet. My name is Jessica Stehbens. I'm currently a 17-year-old high school student living at Bribie Island. I wish I were there to introduce myself in person and meet every single one of you. I must apologise for my absence, but due to my final year grade 12 exams, I'm unable to attend. As I prepare to address you, I think back to 11-year-old me who had just received my grade 6 history assignment. For this assignment, I had to identify an ancestor who had migrated to Australia and uncover the reason for their migration and their life story. For me, this was an extremely difficult task, as I knew nothing of my family, either my mother's side or my father's side. So my mum and I dedicated to reach out to Ian, who we found mentioned on the web. And we asked him to share his knowledge on our family history with me. I thought I probably did that well. My father, Aaron Stehbens, and I took a trip to Imbil to meet Ian and his wife, Margaret, for the first time. On this amazing day, Ian taught me about my heritage. His knowledge of our family history was immense, and he introduced me to Detlef Stehben and his migration to Australia, and about his son, Jacob Heinrich Stehben, and his journey to South Australia from Queensland. I loved learning about my history and was excited to receive a copy of Ian's book, From the Edge of Oblivion. How fortunate I have been to discover our history that was unknown to our family. It makes a difference to me to feel proud of my identity. Now I am in grade 12, and having learnt more about my family history, it is important to me. I have learnt about the lives of other people within our Stehbens family. It is an honour to be part of a family with such immense history and to have someone like Ian who has dedicated so much of his time to discovering this history. I am grateful. I wish I was able to be there to meet everyone, to listen to everyone's stories and to share mine. I do want to meet more of you in the future, more of my Stehbens relatives, and I look forward now to travelling to Bundaberg to see the Stehbens family memorial that is to be dedicated today. I will do that when I'm finished school. Warmest regards to you all, Jessica. Robin, would you mind, as you come from South Australia, and you're part of the Klaus Johann clan in a sense with Sebastian, would you mind just coming and standing as for Jessica, if you don't mind? We honour you because you've come all the way from South Australia. Just to like you to go and stand at near the head of the grave on the other side, please. As a representative of Johann Stehbens' branch, Sandra Rowe. You might come and stand on this side, Sandra, please. As a representative of Kate Andreessen branch, Ron Luth from Bundaberg. As a representative of Willem Stehbens branch, Keisha Stehbens. As a representative of Carolyn Lister branch, it was to be Trish Lester, but I believe they're not here. I'm sorry about that. A representative of Emma Strand branch, inevitably to ask their principal family historian, Cheryl Aldridge. Would you come, please, Cheryl? As a representative of David Stehbens' branch, Paul Harth, please, Paul. And as a representative of the whole Bundaberg community, I couldn't go past asking somebody from the Elvery family, Eric Elvery. Could I invite the group of you, please, to remove the stones, the bricks, and then together unveil the first shroud. Move. And the fabric that is there, I'm going to ask each of them before we finish today to autograph their names on there. There are other family members from other incidents who've already done that, and you're welcome, if you get a chance, to use the pen to put your name on this shroud, which will remain as a memorial in its own right of today's event. So any of you who are here, all of you who are here, we'd love you to autograph that shroud, whether you're family or representing the community in some other way. Would you now please remove that family shroud? The text that is on the granite stone, on the black granite stone, is in your program. Sacred to the memory of Detlef Stehben, also known as David Stehbens, 1814 to 1862, and his wife Anna Wilhelmina Grube, 1821 to 1870, who was buried in the Rose Garden, Maryborough. Also John Frank Jules, 1877 to 1906, tragically killed by an explosion of the boiler at Bonner Sugar Mill, son of Emma and Jane Jules. He is buried together with his grandfather David. They're not here, they live on in their many descendants, and then we've listed and named all their children together with their married partners, and including their surnames. So hence names such as Judas and Andreessen and Elvery and Lister and Strand and Osborne and Cherry are therefore recorded, for this is not just a family memorial, but it's a heritage item for all of Bundaberg. So thank you to all of those who've been part of this process, and in particular David and Penny from Generation Funerals for being a partner with me in this process. You've been a wonderful, wonderful team, and I thank you for your leadership and your hard work and your diligence. Thank you very much. While you stand there, I'm going to now ask the Reverend Stuart Bosch, who's a Methodist minister of South Africa, actually, another immigrant, a Methodist who preached and interred Detlef Stehben in this spot on the 20th of October in 1892. Thank you, Stuart. Would you dedicate our memorial?
Oh. Good afternoon, everybody.
Put this on here if I can.
Yeah.
I think it's there.
There we go. Thank you for the privilege of being able to share in this special moment for the family. I won't keep you long, just to say what has struck me most is the power of memory. And as Ian said, we left South Africa and came to Queensland, where we knew nobody and had no family, and began our family connections again. And when you leave a place like that and come to somewhere strange, as Detlef and the family did, what you hope is that although you leave memorials behind, that you would create new ones, and that family will come to recognize new places and new memories from where you have been. That only happens as we remember. And today, clearly, you see the power of memory, the power of remembering, and just listening to the first read from the young lady who's in her year 12, you see what an effect that has as people can connect to something of their past. And I pray that you will all be blessed as you share in this moment of memory and continue to make new ones to come. Shall we say a prayer as we dedicate this memorial? Let us pray. God, glory and honor and power are yours by right, for you have created all things and made all things by your will. All power is yours, O Lord God, for by your blood you have ransomed your people from every race, language, from every people and nation and every place on earth. Grant to us, God, to trust you not for ourselves alone, but for those whom we remember, for those whom we give thanks for, respect, love, and cherish, for those who are our ancestors that are hidden from us by the shadow of death. May we trust your love to give eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. God our Father, in loving care your hand has created us. You have formed us in your image, and through the Holy Spirit you have breathed in us the gift of life. In the sharing of your love, you have enriched our knowledge of one another. You have blessed us with the gift of family and with the gifts of memory. We claim those gifts today, particularly as we remember the life and work of Detlef and the whole Stehbens family, the lines that are represented here today. We remember all of them and their accomplishments, their commitment, their tenacity, their hard work, and their dedication. May this memorial placed today in their honor be a constant reminder of all of these things and of your love. And as we dedicate it, and each person it represents, we also dedicate ourselves to you. Amen.
Thank you indeed. Thanks, Stuart. Thank you very much, Reverend Stuart. And it's just a privilege that your circumstance connects with us so well. As I said to you before, this is not just a Stehbens memorial. There are many branches of our family, and it just happens that the Stehbenses came early enough that when other young men arrived, like Fred Strand and John Lister, etc., they arrived as the beginnings of their family. Young men arriving on themselves, no other marriages before them, and when they married into the Stehbens family, they therefore became part of the Stehbens umbrella. So I'm not arrogant when I call this a Stehbens memorial. It is a memorial to all those strands and branches. That's the way it happens, and I'm grateful. Now, as I also said, this is not just our memorial, it's something that is a heritage contribution to the history of Bundaberg, and therefore I'm going to ask Nick Page, who represents not only the Bundaberg Regional Heritage Group, but also the Heritage Committee of Bundaberg Regional Council. Nick, would you please come and speak to us, because you encouraged me to do this, and I'm inspired by your encouragement. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks.
Let me give you a mic.
See me put him on there.
If I can. Try again. Too clever for me, these things. We'll try up here.
Okay.
I'm not going to do it.
I'll hold him.
It's not clever. There you are.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much for including the Bundaberg Regional Heritage Group in what is very much a family occasion. It's much appreciated. Little is documented or honoured in the Bundaberg area surrounding the pioneer German-Danish families that emigrated from the Schleswig-Holstein region of Europe in the late 1800s. As we know, this particular grave that we stand beside was sadly unmarked. Now, however, due to you, the descendants, this has now been proudly rectified by this dedication, and it's wonderful to see. Our group would like to see increased recognition of families such as the Stehbenses, and in particular to honour the life of Detlef in his role as bricklayer, brickmaker, water carrier, crabber, violinist, pioneer and patriarch. Yes, part of Forest View Farm, situated in part of what we know today as Kepnock, has been retained by council and named Stehbens Park. But as I've come to learn from reading Ian's superb book, there are indeed many sites and associated recollections located throughout the Bundaberg region that are surely worthy of increased recognition. Detlef's well within the park was abandoned and apparently choked with all manner of farmyard relics until it was finally infilled with gravel by council for safety reasons. The group believes this piece of pioneering ingenuity deserves far more than just being represented by a pile of surface dirt. We're currently in discussions with both Rotary Central and Council around an exciting project to evaluate the installation of interactive historical plaques in selected locations around Bundaberg. Information featuring the life and times of Detlef would indeed be a flagship addition to such a project, and we're committed to see it come to fruition in the not too distant future. So yeah, on behalf of the group, I hope you all enjoy the remainder of your commemorative programme and get to know each other a bit more, and thanks again for the invite in.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. And friends, just a couple of things to say to you before you start moving. We intend to gather together at off Steindl Street at the Baldwin Swamp facility that the council provided and that we've rented for today. It's available for us to just go back, barbecue, bring your lunch, pick up your McDonald's on the way, whatever you want to do. Come back together again. We will be drawing the raffle. There's several items of the raffle, and we hope that most of you who are here win it, actually, because I don't want to be running all over Queensland with a basket of vegetables. But if you haven't yet been able to obtain a raffle ticket, Diane, can you stand and wave your hand? Where are you? She's here in the front row. That wasn't a stand, Diane. Can you stand up so they can see you for a moment? Your hand went up and disappeared for most. This is Diane. She's organising the raffle for us. The other thing is that if you are interested, any expressions of interest about a third edition of the book, which will include a 20th century section at the last end of it, and some rewriting and modifying of existing material, but particularly wanting to honour heroes within the family, and you've heard of some of them today and yesterday, so that the 20th century is represented through their contribution, whether it be as high achievers or whether it be very humble people who carried their life through difficult circumstances and raised families and survived, or other people who did, who are service people, who just serve people in unassuming ways. I don't care whether it's stars or ordinary people that are stars in somebody else's crown. I'd like nominations, and I would do the research with you to try to include as some of those nominees in our book. So if that expression of interest appeals to you, out at there are also more photos available if any of you are now wanting to get a copy of That photo in its full original is available as top prize in the raffle of Detlef and Anna, an 1855. I couldn't possibly value it. It's worth $150 just to make it, but to have it available to you, remember it's something of a heritage item back at the beginning of photography. It makes it incredibly valuable. So those things are available, and we will. You won't get too many other opportunities to see the violin because that's being packed up and taken away now. But there is one thing that my brother David is wanting to show you. There's a piece of one of Detlef's bricks. I don't know whether that's important to you or not, but there it is, using a finger or a stick or something or other that looks like a thumb to put the frog in the top of the brick. So he must have made something like about 3,000 bricks at least to put down in that first well, and there were 25,000 bricks that he had to help carry from the wharf up to the storeroom and in Maryborough, and then later worked to use the red bricks on the decoration of the Maryborough Post Office. If you look at Maryborough Post Office, the archways and the pillars are done with a different brick entirely from the rest of the building. That's the 25,000 red fire bricks that came out as Sophie's ballast to enable them to have a reasonable voyage to Queensland. So my friends, thank you for being part of that. I hope we've introduced you to more of your heritage. I hope you're proud of it. And for all of you who've contributed in any way whatsoever, just being here is a great encouragement. The questions you've given, the love you've expressed, and the privilege to be here. But to say to you, come from South Australia today surprised me, is just wonderful. And to have the Oliver family back, thank you for being here. And from Cairns over there, thank you, coming all the way down. And finally, one last person, the psychiatrist is here if you need help. Suji, would you and your wife please stand and just come forward? I want to introduce you to them. They're not part of our family, this migrant couple, but he's the head of psychology at Melbourne, at where are we? Bundaberg Hospital, and they've become close friends of Margaret and I as we've been their Suji's academic mentors. So thank you for being here. They just said they would like to come when they heard about this. They don't have family in Australia except their own 2 children, and to be part of this whole family gathering and see what Australian families can do. You can take this back to Sri Lanka and reassure them one day when you visit that they do value family in Australia too. Thank you indeed, Suji. Thank you. Bless you both. Can I just say to this, remembering these people brought their Christian faith with us to Australia, can I just conclude with a Christian benediction by saying to you, I'm having a mental block. May the grace of the Lord Jesus be the most amazing experience of the love of God, and may you know it all the way through your life as the Holy Spirit of God fellowships with you. Go in peace to serve and to love others. Amen.
Can I say something?
speak.
Before you all move, I would just like everyone to congratulate this, I'm going to be emotional here, this amazing man. He's inspiring. I've always been proud of my surname, but I don't know, when I'm in his presence, I just feel more. So I just want you all to thank this guy for everything that he's done over all of the years that he's done it. You're just amazing, and I love him so much. Thank you.
That's love, a nice love from my third cousin, 1 generation removed. Thank you. Thank you, Keisha. We love you too. And everybody thanks you. Meet one another. They're all your cousins.
you.